Good morning. And thank you, Keith, for the reading from John chapter 9 about the man born blind. I've enjoyed the series from the Gospel of John. In this series, we have been looking at different... Is it too loud? Okay. We've been looking at different encounters that Jesus had with different people. For many of us, they are well-known stories. In the series outline we were given for these messages, we have been encouraged to try and put ourselves in the world of these people and recreate the details that may not be written, but maybe implied from the text and the context. A few weeks ago, Bryce spoke about Jesus' meeting with the Samaritan woman. And for many of us, we have heard the story so many times. I really appreciated the time that Bryce took to set the scene to the encounter. 2,000 years ago in Palestine, they had a completely different culture and worldviews to ours. Women were shunned, the Samaritans were hated, and close association with a Samaritan woman, particularly one who had been in multiple relationships, would mean ritual uncleanliness for Jesus. In spite of all this, Jesus still reached out to this woman and spoke what she needed to hear. So our passage in John chapter 9 starts out with these verses. As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Here was a man born blind. He was never seen a sunrise or his parents or anything else. Darkness was all he had ever known. But for this man living in Palestine 2,000 years ago, blindness was far more than just a physical disability. There was no welfare. Braille had not been invented, so he could not read or write. He didn't have a seeing eye dog. So he was totally dependent on other people. He was forced to beg, and he had no chance of ever getting married. In a society where it was honorable to take care of your parents in their later life, he would never be able to do that. Instead, his parents would be taking care of him for as long as they could. But it was worse than that. Jewish regulations probably stopped him going into the temple and taking part in regular worship. The Mishnah, which was the first written collection of the Jewish oral traditions, mentions, "All are liable for an appearance offering before the Lord, except for the blind." But far worse than this was the fact that at the time, disabilities, including blindness, were associated with sin. In the verse we read, even Jesus' disciple asked the question, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" So this poor blind beggar was an economic, social, and religious outcast who was living outside normal society. Jesus replied to the disciples' question in verse 3, where he said these words, Neither this man nor his parents sinned, but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. Of course, we are all sinners, but Jesus corrects the disciples and tells them that the man is not blind because of sin, but he doesn't say why the man is blind. Instead, Jesus focuses on what is possible with God. Brothers and sisters, it is important to note that God had not made the man blind in order to show his glory. No, God had sent Jesus to heal people in order to show his glory. And if we read on in verses 4 and 5, as long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world. What Jesus is saying here is that his work must not be interrupted because he is the light that brings light to the day. But the night is coming when he won't be here any longer. And the miracles he was doing would stop. And at the end of verse 5, Jesus again says, I am the light of the world. When Jesus says, I am, he is using the personal covenant name of God that was revealed to Moses in Exodus chapter 3. This is the second of 7 I am statements in John where Jesus says, I am, and then he goes on to make a really important statement about who he is. In this case, I am the light of the world. John chapter 7 through to John chapter 10, verse 21 takes place during the Feast of Tabernacles. And Jesus and his disciples went to Jerusalem for this feast. The Feast of Tabernacles celebrated the harvest and occurred late in autumn when the nights and days were the same length. As well as water ceremonies, this was also a festival of light. The Mishnah explains that whoever has not seen these things has never seen a wonder in his or her life. Their 16 huge golden bowls were placed in the court of the woman. When they were lit at nighttime, all of Jerusalem was lit up. Choirs of Levites would sing during the lighting, while others carrying torches danced in the streets and sang hymns. This must have been an incredible sight. Remember, there was no electricity or street lighting at this time. On the last day of the feast, Jesus was teaching in the court of the woman near where the offerings were placed. Can you imagine the scene? In the very court where the lighting ceremony takes place, Jesus stands beneath the 16 huge bowls of oil and says in John chapter 8, verse 12, I am the light of the world. Maybe it was nighttime and the bowls were lit. That would really have made a statement. In chapter 9, verse 5, he repeats that statement and then goes on to prove that he is the light of the world by bringing sight and true life to someone who was blind. So, how did Jesus heal the blind man? We can see this in verse 6 and 7. After saying this, he spit on the ground, made some mud with the saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. Go, he told him, wash in the pool of Siloam. This word means sent. So the man went and washed and came home seeing. Now, Jesus could have just spoken and the miracle would have happened. What Jesus did may seem strange to us today, but at this time, spit was thought to have medicinal and even magical power, especially if it was from someone who was famous or well known. But more importantly, he made mud, which is like dough. Making dough was work in the eyes of the Pharisees. And Jesus was working on the Sabbath and breaking the Sabbath. Jesus disagreed with their understanding of the Sabbath law, and he deliberately did this to create a controversy. The pool of Siloam, where the men washed of the mud, was also important. It was the source of water in the tabernacle ceremony. Water, along with light, was an important part of the ceremony. The pool was called sent because it was sent from a distant spring. The water was a symbol of cleansing, healing, and life. So the blind man obeyed Jesus and went and washed in the place called sent. Even though the pool had special significance for the Jews, especially during the feast. But it wasn't the place called sent that healed him. No, it was Jesus who was sent by God that healed the man. Then it seems, without any fuss, the man went home being able to see. But let's try and imagine how it was for this man. He had been blind since birth, and he had never ever seen anything. And now, all of a sudden, he was able to see everything around him. He could now see things that previously he could only touch or smell or hear. His physical life had been transformed. This must have been an overload for his sense of sight, which had never been used before. I wonder how long it took him to get home, because he must have been stopping to take in everything on the way. But as we know the story doesn't end there. After this, there are a series of what different commentaries call interrogations. The first question he got were from his neighbor after he got home. It would have been immediately obvious to them that their neighbors, who had been blind from birth, was now able to see. Isn't this the man, the same man who used to sit and beg? No, it can't possibly be him. It must be someone who looks like him. The neighbors can't believe what had happened. But the healed man replies and insists that he is the same man. How then were your eyes opened, they asked. He replied, the man they called Jesus made some mud and put it on my eyes. He told me to go to Siloam and wash. So I went and washed, and then I could see. Okay, so where is this man that healed you? I don't know, was the reply. The neighbors were struggling to believe what had happened and make sure that he was indeed the man who had been blind. They didn't reject the miracle, but what should they do? They decided to take the man to the Pharisees. The Pharisees were the religious leaders of the time. They sat on the high court of Israel, the Sanhedrin, and for minor matters, they were available to the average person. These lead us to the second round of questioning, where the Pharisee questioned the man, and this time, the questioning is a lot harder. One of the first things they find out is that the man was healed on the Sabbath. There are a number of similarities with the healing of the lame man in John chapter 5 we heard about last week. Both were healed on the Sabbath, and the temple leadership and the neighbor raised questions in both stories. And in both stories, Jesus finds the man later on, encourages him, and gets into a debate with the Pharisees about the meaning of his authority. But the Pharisees are not interested in the fact that this man has been healed. The fact that he was healed on the Sabbath is their main concern. It is a real problem for them. Some of the Pharisees argue that Jesus is not from God because he broke the Sabbath. But there is a division amongst the Pharisees because some of them ask, how can a sinner perform such signs? They are convinced that Jesus is a sinner. But the problem was that only someone from God can perform such a miracle. Sadly, the Pharisees were stuck in their darkness. Remember the story of one of their colleagues, Nicodemus. When he spoke to Jesus in John 3, verse 2, he said, "Rabbi, we know that you are a teacher who has come from God, for no one could perform the signs you are doing if God were not with him." Nicodemus was able to reason that if Jesus performed such miracles, he must be from God. But his colleagues could not because of their idea that Jesus is a sinner. Despite their unbelief, they asked the man, What have you to say about him? It was your eyes he opened." The man replied, "He is a prophet." But even though they asked this question, we can see in verse 18 that they still didn't believe the blind man had received his sight. So they called for the man's parents and they started to question to them. The parents' response was perhaps a little disappointing. This was because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders who had decided that anyone who acknowledged that Jesus was the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. Let's not forget that they also carried the stigma around with them that it might be their own sin that had caused their son's blindness. So their response to the Pharisees was, "We know he was born blind, but how he can see now, or who opened his eyes, we don't know. Ask him. He is of age. He will speak for himself." It is easy to critical of the parents, but let's remember that the fear of the Jewish leaders was a very real thing at the time. Remember Nicodemus. He came to Jesus at night, and Joseph of Arimathea, who took Jesus' body away for burial, was a secret disciple of Jesus because he was in fear of the Jewish leaders. Perhaps because the parents were not able to give a decent answer, the Jewish leaders summoned the healed man again. Unlike his parents, the man is bold and quite clever with his answer. And he really starts to annoy the Jewish leaders. They began by making a proud claim of their knowledge. We know this man is a sinner. They were probably trying to intimidate the man into agreeing with them. But the man replies with knowledge of his own that can't be argued with, and this is what he says. Whether he is a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know, I was blind, but now I see. Brothers and sisters, it didn't matter what the religious leaders said. The man knew that he was blind, and now he was able to see. No one could take that away from him. Even though the Pharisees don't believe the man was healed, they continue with the questions. What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? I really like the man's response. And you can see how bold he has become. I have told you already, and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too? This really upsets the Jewish leaders. And they started to insult him. You are this fellow's disciple. We are disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses, but as for this fellow, we don't even know where he comes from. These last comments really showed the Jewish leaders' lack of knowledge and their spiritual blindness. They assumed that if he was a disciple of Jesus, he could not be a disciple of Moses. But Jesus himself was a disciple of Moses. He fulfilled the Old Testament prophecies about the Messiah, and in Matthew 5:17 he said, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them." But instead of being intimidated, the man grows in confidence and he starts to go on the offensive. He mocks their lack of knowledge about where Jesus came from. This miracle needed an explanation. Such a great miracle had to be from God. There is no other explanation. His thinking was Jesus had healed him. Only God can do such things. Therefore, Jesus must be from God. The Jewish leaders replied to the man, "You were steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us?" And they threw him out. This was a truly tragic situation. The man who had been healed had been shunned all his life because of his blindness and excluded and been on the outside. Now he had been healed, but he was excluded from the synagogue by the religious leaders who should have known better. But the story doesn't end there. Let's look at verse 35. Jesus heard that they had thrown him out, and when he found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" "Who is he, sir?" the man asked. "Tell me so that I may believe in him." Jesus said, "You have now seen him. In fact, he is the one speaking with you." Then the man said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshipped him. Jesus, the light of the world, had brought the man physical healing. The physical healing changed the man's life in terms of his economic, social, and religious status. But even greater than that, Jesus brought spiritual healing. The man received his spiritual sight. But it was different for the Jewish leaders. Did you notice how different the responses were between the man and the religious leaders? The man opens up more and more, and he progress until he finally made a full confession of faith, receiving his spiritual sight. Rather, after he had been healed, he referred to Jesus as the man called Jesus. Later, when he was questioned by the Jewish leaders for the first time, he said, "He is a prophet." After he was questioned for a second time, he defended Jesus as a man from God, and he was thrown out by the Jewish leaders. And finally, after Jesus had gone looking for him, he said, "Lord, I believe." And he worshipped him. The man was healed, and his life was physically and spiritually transformed. And this led to his clear confession of Jesus as Lord. In contrast, the Pharisees close up and they became increasingly blind to Jesus, leaving them in total darkness. They started off saying, how can a sinner perform such signs? Then they said, "We know this man is a sinner." Later they said about Jesus, "But as for this fellow, we don't even know where he comes from." Till finally they banished the man who had been healed. In the end, the man who was blind from birth received physical and spiritual sight, while the Pharisees are left with complete spiritual blindness. So when we look at the whole passage, it wasn't just the blind man who encountered Jesus. There were 4 groups with different reactions. The neighbors saw the physical evidence and wanted to believe, but they were not sure. Then there were the parents who were afraid to make a stand. The blind man encountered Jesus, and he was healed spiritually and physically, and he worshiped Jesus. And finally, there was the Pharisees, the religious leaders, the people who should have been pointing people to God. Instead, they were doing the exact opposite, and they rejected Jesus. Whereabouts are we on our journey with Jesus as we encounter him? This man had a life-changing encounter with Jesus. Have we had a life-changing encounter with Jesus? Do people want to know what had caused the change in our life? Like the hillman, this provides us with an opportunity to witness about what Jesus has done. And just like in the story, not everyone will accept what we say. In our modern world of reason and logic, people will mock us, but let us not be afraid of other people. If people reject us, Jesus will seek and find us, because he has promised us that he will never leave us or forsake us. This world is a dark and hostile place. It needs the light of the world, and we can shine and direct others to the light. At the start of the service, we sang the song, "Light of the world, you step down into darkness. Open my eyes, let me see. Beauty that made this heart adore you. Hope of a life spent with you. Here I am to worship. Here I am to bow down. Here I am to say that you're my God." As we come to the table and take Holy Communion together, we remember Jesus, the light of the world, who came down into our darkness, taking us out of that darkness and into the light. The bread and the cup reminds us that the light of the world faced incredible darkness and agony when he hung on the cross. The bread reminds us of his broken and beaten body and the agony he faced. The cup reminds us of the crown of thorns and his blood that was shed for us. As we come to the table, we acknowledge and confess our sin. The Pharisees threw out the man from the synagogue. Jesus does not throw us out, just as he went looking for the man he had healed. So he comes looking for us today. He welcomes us to the table, his remembrance feast. Just as the man who was blind bowed down in worship, let's continue to worship him this morning as we take our communion together. Before we come and take communion, Kid is going to pray. Please.